Hello and welcome to all of our young Padawan learners out there. I'm Joe, here with me is my co-host Dan.
Hello and greetings.
And today we're going to be continuing our Kotor podcast with a video about Taris. Now, the end part of Taris, with Davik's estate. Davik is the main crime lord of Taris. He's head of the Black Vulkars. And it's only by stealing the access codes, sneaking into his base, that you are able to get off the planet. Because he owns the Ebon Hawk, the fastest ship on the Outer Rim. Basically a precursor to the Millennium Falcon. And weirdly, I actually like the Ebon Hawk more. Probably because I'd never liked the gray on the Millennium Falcon. It's just, I found it colorless. And no different from the Imperial ships sometimes. Just in how colorless it was. And I don't know, just like having an all gray ship kind of made it feel sanitized and robotic and almost dystopian on the exterior. But the Ebon Hawk, it's funny how you just slap a bit of orange on it and it feels like it's got a lot of personality to it. And it feels cozier, it feels warm. So
it also feels not as cramped.
Yeah, even though the ship is obviously a lot smaller. In-game, it's a lot more cramped than the Millennium Falcon is. The Millennium Falcon interior in-universe is actually huge. It's like a large 2-story house almost. So the interior of the Millennium Falcon always felt warm and inviting. It's just the exterior which always felt horrid. But if fans disagree with me, that's fine. I'm not bashing Han Solo or like his ship. I'm just saying I never liked the exterior, but Han as a character always appealed to everyone because he's Han Solo. This ship is Davik's prize possession, and he hopes to escape in it with Calo Nord. Likely Calo would have killed Davik afterwards and taken the ship for himself.
Who could blame him?
But Davik is killed in the battle that follows, and Calo is, almost gets himself blown up. He's lucky. His bomb doesn't go off. And, he narrowly avoids getting hit by one of Malak's capital ship's shots, and manages to stow aboard a ship and gets captured by the Sith. Wherefore, he's introduced to Malak himself. But that's later. Anyways, Taris is blasted to smithereens. Sort of. Well, the planet is bombarded. It survives, but it's bombarded. And over the millennia, it'll turn back into a city planet again. In time for the new Sith Wars. And the Galactic Civil War and Clone Wars and whatnot. So, you then have the gang fleeing. And I'm not even going to discuss this stupid minigame of blasting at enemy starfighters because you can't actually lose this minigame. I've tried putting the game on hard and I've never been able to lose. And you just can't lose. It's glitchy. I think you can't really take any hits. So,
and sometimes...
And I remember once leaving it on for 3 hours, walking away, coming back, and I was still... I'd only taken a bit of damage.
And sometimes the transition from the base, Davik's base, to
the ship,
even turning off the movies, it got glitchy, and sometimes...
Yeah. But anyways, you then land on Dantooine, and thereupon Dantooine, after being reintroduced, I should say, to these Jedi Masters who helped purge Revan of her memories, to an extent. Well, her mind was damaged, but they tried to repress as many memories as possible, but they couldn't fully succeed. And Jar himself isn't a great trainer, so Revan is able to relearn a lot of Jedi tricks in spite of his poor teachings. And, not poor teachings, but his poor teaching capabilities, I should say. Because the teachings are perfect, his teaching capabilities are the problem. And after a brief training montage, Revan is now a Jedi. We went for Jedi Guardian, which is to say a physical fighter. You have the options of Jedi Consular, Jedi Sentinel, and Jedi Guardian. This is just a game feature. This has no bearing on storyline or plot, nor should it, at least in terms of like plot. But in some ways, it's more, I would argue, an archetypal decision in a way, because you essentially have the Consular, who's more the magician archetype, and you have the Guardian, who's more the warrior archetype. Sentinel is essentially warrior, but watered down with a bit of the Consular elements to it, without the awesomeness of the Consular class or the magician archetype. That aside, Revan, now female Revan, if you go with her, she'd chose Jedi Guardian, so she'd be more in the mold of a female warrior archetype, rather like, okay, let me think. Star Wars does not have a great many female warrior archetypes that are Jedi for the most part. They've got a few, at least none that, there's not that many that a lot of people might be familiar with. But we'll say Celie. Celie Tachi is a good example. She's a female warrior, but Celie is often put also in the lover archetype with Obi-Wan Kenobi, because Obi-Wan Kenobi is really the magician archetype, but he has shades of the lover with Celie Tachi because, his main love interest. That said, we put Revan into the warrior role. Karf, because if you go with female, I'd argue he's not really the warrior archetype, but the lover archetype. He's more, I guess you could say, how do I put it? A good example of the lover archetype is Ted Mosby, or even, to an extent, Dick Grayson from DC Comics. Dick Grayson is not the warrior archetype. He's not the magician. He's not even the king archetype. He's the lover. He is there to be the lover of Barbara Gordon. And Barbara Gordon is the lover archetype, there to be the lover of Dick Grayson. They're the lover archetypes. That's my point. Karf is the lover. Revan is the warrior, but with shades of the lover thrown in. And so we kind of jumped from a skill-based character to a Jedi, and we did not level up till that point. Bear it in mind, though, that Dantooine is a farming planet where it probably fields enough crops and harvest to feed hundreds of other planets. This is pure farming, so there are no cities on this planet. There are it does not have a big population, but almost all droids and all people are basically just farming. And there is a Jedi enclave there, a secret one, and their main job is mostly to supervise and protect the locals. The trouble is that the Jedi have begun, true to Nomi Sunrider Rook Lamar's order of Jedi, they have been neglecting their duties. Protecting the locals is not important to them. Actually, Rook complains about this job and about mediating between the two different families, the Capulets and, the Sandrels and the Metales. And Rook does not like this job. He complains about it. He whines. The thing here is, I would argue, we truly see the corruption of this Jedi Order. Just in that, it's like, here, Initiate, you take on the negotiating between these two families on the verge of killing each other. They've brought weapons onto the planet. No, this is a big deal. This is a big deal for Dantooine. But the way the Jedi are talking are like, well, maybe we should have you do it. We don't really want to do it. And you have Rook, and they've given me no small amount of headaches. Then why don't you do something about it, you fat old man?
Because if they're doing something about it and then complaining about it once they're at the temple, at least they're doing something, and I could get their annoyance.
But you have to actually go out and solve this problem. The thing is, it just, this could escalate from these two families. What if other families start taking sides? Then you'll have a full-scale war, and because Dantooine feeds a lot of other planets, likely city planets, billions of people will starve to death. This could have a rollout effect And on top of that, the last thing you need is a famine and then plague striking the galaxy, just as you're losing an all-out war with the Sith Empire. But no, the Jedi in this enclave they just don't care. And that part is truly the horrifying part. And that's really a revelation in a way that you are not fighting good versus evil, but evil versus evil in a way. It's just a selection of a lesser of two evils. Because you have to bear in mind, the Jedi Order of Odan-urr was a pure good, it was a form of good, pureness, and perfection. But the Jedi Order that Nomi rebuilt with the aid of that monster, Vrook Lamar, is an order that believes in the slightest punishment results in cutting you off from the Force, which most Jedi don't survive the process. Most die from it. And there is no... So essentially, this Jedi Order began practicing something it was never intended to. Executions. You add in Vrook's many abuses, the cowardice shown by Zez-Kyle and Kavar, the hubris and egomania of Atris throughout her entire career, the lack of resolve of the Master who died on Korriban, all this. And you also add in the fact that the Jedi are actually... their numbers are broken by this time in Kotor 1. They have maybe a few thousand, and by the time the Battle of the Starforge is over, they'll have maybe they won't even have 10,000 anymore. So here's the thing, though. At the start of the Mandalorian Wars and whatnot, they probably had hundreds of thousands of Jedi. Probably, I like to sometimes put maximum number, probably about 1 million Jedi running around in the galaxy. The problem is, the Order's been split probably in half. Then you have to cut that number almost to pieces so that you have maybe probably a few dozen thousand at most. And then you got the Dark Wars. So that's probably a good kind of litmus test for this era until you get down to only one Jedi left in the galaxy. From about 1 million to 1, down to 1, that's not a good sign. But the problem is, by this time, the Jedi have, I'll use my corrected numbers, a few dozen thousand. They're basically saying, we can't protect everyone, so let them die. It's a bit of it's almost like the Jedi became nihilistic in that, there's a line at the beginning of the Merlin movie where, if I must die, let the whole world burn. That's basically the mentality these Jedi have taken. And I know a lot of people might say that I'm overreading the situation of the Sandrol and Matale families, but this is the primary duty of the Jedi, to negotiate between people, to find a peaceful solution, and essentially apply the Miyagi-Do moral lesson of no be there when there is violence, and to try to mediate and de-escalate every situation. Because there's a lesson Qui-Gon Jinn once said in Jedi Apprentice. It's that the minute I have to draw my lightsaber, I have already failed. When the goal is never to draw my sword. That is the Jedi moral belief system. But these Jedi are basically saying, it's too boring, it's too much of a headache, it's too hard to negotiate. Unless I have to draw my lightsaber, I don't care about the situation or the problem.
And one sad thing is that there are some of the Jedi in this order that essentially say, maybe we should have gone with Revan and Malak. And they complain more about the Masters, but they say, don't tell the Masters I said that.
Yeah, they're living in fear. But that's primarily, say, Juhani and whatnot. But when you look at... Juhani also ends up a case in point of really bad teachings because her master pushed her and egged her on to turn to the dark side, turned her to the dark side so that Juhani would attack her, and then they intended to throw Revan out there when Juhani began corrupting the Grove and corrupting some of the local beasts, and Revan had the mission of basically either kill her or turn her back to the light. Either way, it's a mission success. Which the Jedi turned Juhani to the dark side. And then when she comes crying back, they're like, okay, good, Juhani, we're glad you're back with the light. You are now a Jedi Knight. Now you're going to go prove you're a Jedi Knight and prove your worth by going on a suicide mission with Revan. And should Revan start to slip back to the dark side, you're to kill him or kill her, as we tend to go with female. This is not the Jedi teachings of, even to an extent, Master Yoda. Yoda would be appalled at these guys. Because Yoda, one has to bear in mind, as much as he was on board with the whole Luke killing Vader idea to an extent, we have to bear in mind, partway through episode 6, Yoda decided to balk on that idea, realizing it was wrong. Yoda backs away from that plan. It's Ben who's like, no, let's do it. Yoda says at the last minute, maybe not. He's like, we have to leave it in Luke's hands. Luke should have the right to decide for himself. So, kudos to Yoda. And so, an Obi-Wan Kenobi would be horrified by this Jedi Order. And I think Mace Windu would be, Qui-Gon Jinn.
If Anakin was there and turned to the dark side, I can't blame him for doing that, because
this Jedi Order is a perversion of what it. They have perverted every teaching of odan-urr, and it's just it's just awful. Now that said, there are Mandalorian raiders slaughtering the farmers by the hundreds for sport, and the Jedi are doing nothing.
And
they basically throw the job at Revan, a neophyte, a Padawan, along with a bunch of, I'm going to basically say, Republican soldiers and mercenaries who have rallied behind Revan, the Ebon Hawk crew, I mean. They basically chuck it at a bunch of strangers and a neophyte Padawan and say, go deal with that and Juhani. We can't be bothered enough to deal with it.
And it doesn't help that you have a Mandalorian in that crew.
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean by a mercenary. Yeah. Revan's crew has a Mandalorian.
And the survivors on the planet are pretty much traumatized. Like the one woman who obsesses about her droid. Her husband died by raiders.
Yeah, but the thing is, you've got... It's like Kreia said, these Jedi are waiting for the echo to reach them. The echo of the crimes of all these Mandalorians, of all these Darksiders, to reach them. They're waiting for the problem to come to their doorstep because they're scared of going out into the real world to confront it. They're scared, and so they're hiding from the problem. They're hiding from the Mandalorian raiders because they're scared of confronting them. They're scared of the dark side, so they're hiding from it. And they'd rather take a untrained Padawan, chuck her out there and say, you deal with it. We're not dealing with this. It's scary. They're a child playing at being an adult and hiding from the consequences of their own actions. And this failure on their part is something that's going to come back to bite them in Kotor 2, quite rightfully. And the sad part is that the rest of the galaxy is going to have to suffer because these guys are, quite frankly, monsters. Because they are monstrously evil by being this cowardly. But I could at least give Vandar credit for one thing. At least he was on the capital ship of a Republic crew, out in the front line to an extent, leading the battle against the Starforge. Vrook is Grand Master, and he never showed up for the battle. If it was Yoda, Yoda would have been there out in the front. Same with Mace Windu. When it came time for the Clone Wars to start, those two were almost the first two on the ground, ready to fight. Why? They felt they had an obligation. Of course, they're basically co-Grand Masters, so one of them could go rally what Jedi he could and say, you go fetch us an army, I'm going to go rescue Obi-Wan and Anakin. And Yoda said, Roger, co-Grand Master, I'll go get the army, and I'll meet you there. And you know what? That worked. But here, Vrook basically said to a junior council member from a backwater temple and said, I can't be bothered to play Grandmaster. I'm going to give you the responsibility. You and Jar, really, you guys are nothings in the Order. You're heads of a small temple. I'm giving you the job of leading the Republican Jedi forces to the Battle of the Starforge while we stay behind and bite our nails.
There was also another hint that I think I caught while we're playing the Order. There's one person that seems like he comes to beg the Order for help, but there's a hint that it's a bit of an ultimatum to the Jedi temple there.
Oh, yeah, the guy...
We're saying, you need to get involved or else I'll rally people to slaughter the Jedi here.
Well, he doesn't exactly do that. He's the guy who hid behind his daughter. Yeah, him... No, he's not threatening the Jedi per se, but he basically offers a bribe. I'll pay you all this money for you to actually go out and seek vengeance.
Which shows that the locals are getting frustrated with the Jedi.
Oh yeah, the Jedi don't care about them. And the Jedi are abusive robber barons. This is what the Jedi that odan-urr loved so much and spent 1,000 years serving have been reduced to. So we're not trying to be an angry rant here, but we're just explaining this is the lore of the Dantooine mission and the whole idea philosophically behind it. And a lot of this is where this planet's storylines leads really well into the rest of the game storylines and to Kotor 2. So kudos to the writers of Kotor 2 for taking a lot of the ideas of these sets of missions and turning them into long-term plot points and building pretty much the entire lore of the Kotor era, putting it together. Like Obsidian did a great job with that. And most of the missions on this planet seem and feel like side quests, but they're all interlinked and interconnected, and they have to do with the Jedi's neglect. But for one thing, it's horrifying to think about the fact that, you know, a dude hid behind his own daughter while Mandalorians were slaughtering. As Kandor says, you should have protected her better. You had an obligation. It should not have been she who died, but you. You were her father. You ought to have jumped in front of that blaster for her. Even if they were holding you down, you should have called out and said, take me instead. But you didn't have the guts to do that. How dare you come here and complain? You have no right. Now, I know people might say Taris was being harsh, but I actually agree with him. You're a father. You have an obligation to protect your child at all cost, at the cost of your own life, if need be. That is your child. That said, the fact that you've got the Jedi who are just neglecting their responsibilities, especially when this could have rollout effects for like the entire galaxy, is just mind-numbing. That said, Master Doran is a poor historian. Like he's the guy who recounts the history of the past few decades, recounting the story of Exar Kun, which, okay, he does not really get into too much detail. He doesn't seem to know much about the Exar Kun Wars, which is really pathetic on his part. I say pathetic because, you know, I'm a historian, so I tend to love to get lost into all the little details. You know me, I always get lost in all the little details, all the nooks and crannies of every era. This guy, Exar Kun, came to the Order and corrupted a great many Jedi, which took us by surprise, and then he waged a full-on war against us before we ultimately defeated him. Okay, what else? That's it? Wow, you're boring. You really don't like your subject matter. Okay, moving on. Then you've got him recounting the story of the Mandalorian Wars. He really just, like, only says in, like, 3-4 sentences everything. Like, Mandalorians showed up, they attacked us on 3 different points, and the Jedi felt that there was a bigger threat. Really, the Jedi were running scared, let's be honest. The Jedi were afraid of the Mandalorians. And Revan and Malak felt, along with the Jedi exile, felt that, you know what? No, let's not run and hide. Let's actually confront the problem and deal with these guys. That said, Revan and Malak then eventually went too far, got corrupted, and took off for the unknown regions, whereupon they found some sort of weapon and came back and became the Sith. wow, dude, you're just glossing over every detail, aren't you? Like, Kotor 2 goes into more detail, but what I like is that in Kotor 1, you have more other characters go into a great deal of detail, but Duran does not have any interest in doing so. It's like, wow. He does not feel like he's a passionate historian. When you get to Atris, Kreia, and even Brianna, Mikal, in the second game, they love getting into every little detail. Even Jolie Bindo discusses every detail he can of history, so that you get that these are passionate historians. But Duran isn't. That's... wow. So the Jedi are actually dumbing down their education in a way, which... well, I get the sense that since the Nomi Sunrider era, they've been doing that, and that this has led to a downward spiral for the Jedi. So that this is why the Sith ultimately triumph over them for a long time in this era. It's because the Sith basically got to preserve their brains, and, well, the Jedi kind of got dumber. That said, the trouble is that the Sith ultimately underestimated the Jedi because they got used to the Vrooks and the Zeskayels and the Kavars of the era, and didn't count on someone like Exile, who was a genius, coming along and trumping them. So this Dantooine mission is very, very important. Or set of missions, I should say. And the Jedi training itself gives a lot of ideas of how far the Jedi have kind of fallen and how incompetent they've kind of grown. At least that's how I tend to read it. Overall, we're not going to rate this chapter just yet. We still have to get through the Star Map mission, which is a really fun mission. The thing about Kotor 1 is that while the Sandral Matale story is boring, the Juhani and Mandalorian hunt is pretty fun on Dantooine. And, well, you had fun. You got to kill both bosses. Or at least defeat both bosses, because we spared Juhani, because we have to spare her. We both adore her too much. I really like Juhani. Shame she dies in the Dark Wars.
Yeah.
Because every Jedi basically has to die in Dark Wars. That's part of the lore in the first opening paragraph of Kotor 2 in the intros. So, I'm also sad that my precious Jolie Bindo dies. Sorry, he's probably my favorite character in Kotor 1.
Yeah.
But you ultimately have, like, just such a fun set of missions here. I don't like the cave. I like the Mandalorian hunt and Juhani, but the Star Map part I do enjoy, though. That, you have such a fun mission there, although it's like 3 minutes long. It's a great little, semi-boss fights, and then off to Kashyyyk. So we're going to conclude Dantooine next time, and then we're going to move to Kashyyyk and do an opening thing with Kashyyyk probably next time. So don't forget to take that lightsaber of yours to the like and subscribe button to stay tuned for our next video.